The courtroom was quiet at first, the kind of silence that weighs in the air whenever people are nervous, uncertain, or waiting to see what truth will unfold. The judge, a stern woman known for her sharp observations and her dislike for dishonesty, settled into her seat. She adjusted her glasses, glanced at the papers in front of her, and then looked up at the two parties standing on opposite sides of the room. On one side stood a man named Daniel Cole, a thin, restless figure whose shifting eyes suggested discomfort long before he opened his mouth. On the other was Melissa Harding, accompanied by her husband, both standing with the stiff posture of people who believe they have been wronged and are desperate to prove it. Between them stood a story: a used car, a questionable sale, missing paperwork, unpaid loans, and a tangle of events that neither side fully agreed upon. And it was the judge's responsibility to untangle the mess. The judge opened the case file. "Mr. Cole," she began, "I want to start at the beginning. You once owned a car you later sold to Ms. Harding, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," he replied. "What kind of car was it?" "A 2004 Monte Carlo." "And when did you buy this vehicle?" Daniel scratched the side of his neck. "I believe sometime earlier that year, maybe around the spring months." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have documentation showing the purchase date?" He shook his head. "No, Your Honor." This was the first thing that made the judge lean back in her chair, already unimpressed. "We'll circle back to that. Now tell me, how did you pay for the car?" "I financed it." "With whom?" "Tri-Cities Financial." "How much was the loan?" "A little over $5,000. I think around $5,300. "And your monthly payment?" "About $250. The judge nodded, scribbling a note. "So by your own estimate, you had been making payments for about 6 months before selling the vehicle to Ms. Harding?" "Approximately," she continued. "And in those 6 months, how much of the loan did you pay off?" Daniel shrugged. "Just the monthly amounts. Maybe 2 or 3 payments before I fell behind." The judge sighed, clearly seeing where this was heading but allowing him to continue. 3. Turning to the buyer, she shifted her gaze toward Melissa. "Ms. Harding, when did you purchase this car from Mr. Cole?" "November 26th, Melissa said firmly. "I remember because I kept the date written down." "And how much did you pay?" "In total, $5,500. The judge stilled. She looked directly at Daniel. "Is that the amount she paid you?" Daniel hesitated. "No, Your Honor. She paid me only $2,500. Melissa's eyebrows shot upward, and her husband clenched his jaw. Melissa stepped forward slightly and said, "Your Honor, that's not true. I gave him $500 as a first payment, and the very next day I handed him the remaining $5,000. My husband was with me." The judge tapped her pen twice on the desk. "Do you have a receipt?" "No," Melissa admitted, "because he said it was a handshake deal. But I do have documentation on the money I borrowed from a friend to pay him. I'm still repaying that loan." This visibly affected the judge. A buyer still paying for a car she didn't even own anymore. It painted a grim picture. The judge leaned back. "Mr. Cole, when you sold her the car, did you provide her the title?" "No, Your Honor." "Why not?" "Because the loan wasn't finished yet." "So the title was still held by the financial company?" she asked. "Yes." "And did you tell Ms. Harding about the lien on the car?" He swallowed. I don't believe I explicitly said that." Melissa chimed in quickly. "He absolutely did not. If I'd known there was a lien, I never would have bought the car." The judge nodded slowly. "I understand." The judge put down her pen, crossed her arms, and looked at Daniel with an expression that signaled deep skepticism. "Let me get this straight," she said. "You financed a car for $5,300. You didn't put down a cent. You drove the car for half a year. Then, despite making only a few payments, you sold it to Ms. Harding, someone who trusted your word, for a higher price than you originally financed it for." Daniel looked down at the floor. "And after receiving her money," the judge continued, "you stopped making payments to the finance company, allowing the loan to default." He nodded faintly, meaning the company eventually repossessed the car from Ms. Harding, who had already paid you thousands of dollars? Yes. A wave of quiet anger rippled through the courtroom, though no one spoke. The judge narrowed her eyes. Mr. Cole, what do you do for a living? I'm not working at the moment. How do you support yourself? I live with my parents. When was the last time you worked? December, he said, almost whispering. And why did you stop working? Daniel exhaled and said, I was incarcerated. The judge didn't flinch. For what offense? Distribution of narcotics. He spoke quickly, as though hoping the words would disappear in the air. And the charges were dismissed? He shook his head. I pled to a lesser charge. They gave me probation. The judge nodded. Understood. And during this time, during your incarceration, did you make any attempt to continue paying the loan on the car? No. Did you notify the buyer of any issues? No. Did you attempt to refund the money she paid you? No. That was the moment the judge's face hardened. Now she turned to Melissa again. Tell me what happened after you purchased the car. Melissa's voice shook slightly as she explained. Your Honor, I bought the car thinking it was mine. We took it home, inspected it, and started using it right away. There weren't major problems with it at first. But after a couple months, letters began arriving from a finance company I'd never heard of. Letters addressed to Daniel demanding payment. That's when I realized something wasn't right. Her husband stepped in to clarify. We tried contacting him. He didn't respond. Then one morning, the car was simply gone from our driveway. The finance company took it, and they confirmed with us that the loan hadn't been paid. Melissa shook her head, her eyes glistening. I was left without a car and with a debt I'm still paying back, and I have nothing to show for it. The judge summarized the situation. 1. Daniel sold a car he did not legally own outright. 2. He failed to disclose a lien. 3. He accepted thousands of dollars from the buyer. 4. He stopped paying the loan. 5. The financial company reclaimed the car. 6. The buyer suffered both financial loss and emotional stress. Then she turned to Daniel with a look that left no room for excuses. Mr. Cole, she said, this situation demonstrates dishonesty, irresponsibility, and a complete disregard for how your actions affect others. You sold a car that was still secured by a loan. You misled the buyer. You accepted her money, spent it, and left her to face the consequences. Daniel looked pale. The judge continued, the law is very clear. You cannot sell a vehicle encumbered by a lien without informing the buyer and without settling the debt. You created this mess. Now you are going to pay for it. The courtroom held its breath as the judge made her decision. I rule in favor of the plaintiff, she said, pointing toward Melissa. Mr. Cole is ordered to repay the full $5,500 that Ms. Harding paid for the vehicle. A murmur of relief passed through Melissa and her husband. The judge wasn't finished. I am also awarding additional damages for the inconvenience, financial strain, and loss of transportation caused by Mr. Cole's negligence. Including the cost of her loan payments, I am awarding a total judgment of $7,000. Daniel's shoulders sagged, as though he had been physically struck by the words. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Court was adjourned. Melissa let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her husband placed a reassuring arm around her shoulders. They walked toward the exit with the quiet dignity of people who had endured something unjust and had finally been heard. Daniel stayed behind for a moment, staring blankly at the floor. It seemed he was absorbing the reality of the consequences he had avoided for far too long. Outside the courtroom, Melissa paused to wipe away a tear, not of sorrow, but of relief. Her husband said softly, "We'll get through the rest. At least now the truth is out." She nodded. And that's worth something. Cases like this often appear simple on the surface. A disagreement over money, a misunderstanding about paperwork, or a delayed payment. But behind them lie complex human behaviors. Trust, carelessness, deception, desperation, and hope. Melissa had trusted Daniel. She had believed in a handshake deal, the sort of agreement that people once considered sacred. Daniel took advantage of that trust, knowingly or not, and his actions rippled outward, harming someone else far more than he understood. The judge's ruling was more than a legal judgment. It was a reminder that integrity matters, that dishonesty carries a price, and that those who take advantage of others will eventually be held accountable.